Hello everyone, I'd like to thank you all for attending or viewing this presentation. I'm really excited to be presenting this work to you all because this is really the culmination of years of research by my colleagues and me at the Regular Food Science Lab. Today I'll be discussing a particular beverage or concoction. I'll be presenting research relevant to it from the Regular Food Science Lab's surveys, and I will be using that evidence from my research to argue why this particular drink is a menace to society and should be abolished from existence, production, distribution, etc. Um, so to begin this discussion with the research from our lab, the beverage of interest is, well, the cherry. The cherry flavor is within the beverage, is very relevant to the beverage. So um, that's sort of, we were sort of asking various questions in one of our surveys relevant to various fruit flavors, including cherry, right? And so in this first survey I'll be discussing, this took place in November of 2017. We surveyed roughly 1,000 Americans, and we gave them a big list of a whole bunch of different fruits. Sort of the most common fruits that you would think of, all kinds of different fruits. And basically, we had each of the participants in the survey put all of the different fruits in the list into one of three different categories. So we had the first category as your top fruits. These are fruits that, you think, you see that kind of fruit and you're like, oh man, that's a really good fruit. I want to eat that fruit. You're pretty much, you're never dissatisfied to eat some of your top fruits. These are just some of your favorite, your really good fruits, right? Then you got mid-range fruits. So these are fruits that are like, they're okay. Right, you think that these fruits are like, they're pretty good. They're not like amazing. You don't sort of love these fruits. You wouldn't always eat this fruit if you're given it or whatever. But every so often you get a hankering for this fruit. But you're not like going out to the grocery store to see if you can pick up this fruit every week, right? Then you got bottom fruits. So these are the fruits that maybe they're just too sour for you, or something about the texture is off, or you just something about the taste, you just don't like this. You just think this is just not a very good fruit. You're not a fan of it. Those are sort of bottom fruits, right? We also had two other questions in the survey. So the second asked of the entire list of fruits that we gave them, the big old list of fruits. We asked which one out of all these fruits would the subjects consider the most dog shit fruit. So really just the worst one out of the whole list of fruits. What's like the worst fruit on there? And then as sort of a follow-up, once they put that down, we would ask, why did they choose that specific fruit? What reason would you attribute to deciding that that fruit in particular was the most dog shit? And so to continue sort of focusing our discussion on cherries in particular, from our survey results, we found that cherries, for most subjects, were generally considered to be mid-range, right? So, you see fairly reasonable results, at least I think, from these surveys, where a lot of the top fruits are sort of, fan favorites, or large sort of popular fruits people generally like bananas, watermelons, strawberries. A lot of people like those, the Honeycrisp apples, right? And then your mid-range fruits are the kind of things that, some people may be big fans, some people maybe not so much of a fan, or they're just sort of middling things. You got your kiwis, right? And so cherries are in there as well, notably. Cherries, not a lot of people's sort of favorite fruit. There are definitely some, but generally across the board, or on average, they're considered sort of middle of the road by sort of the general population. And then, in your bottom fruits, it sort of makes sense. You got grapefruit. A lot of people think it's just way too sour. You got weird fruits like dragon fruits, or sort of like figs with the weird sort of texture stuff going on, or sometimes there's like bees in them or something apparently. So, you got to watch out for some of those bottom fruits on there. Now, we found something pretty interesting about cherries in the following question on what was considered the most dog shit fruit, right? And so the general trend, which sort of makes sense, were that the fruits most considered dog shit were generally the ones in the bottom fruit category, and then less so in the mid-range category, and a very small minority of subjects said that fruits that were generally in the top category were the most dog shit. But there was sort of an interesting outlier in our survey where, despite them being a mid-range fruit generally, cherries were considered dog shit, the most dog shit fruit by a very significant portion of the survey subjects, nearly 7%. And so a lot of the mid-range fruits, those were more in the like 3 to like 2% range. So this is a pretty significant outlier. They're not quite as, not quite as considered dog shit as much as some of the bottom fruits. People apparently really don't like figs in our survey subject population, as well as grapefruits. Now, you may be wondering, sort of, well, why do so many people think cherries are dog shit? What's the explanation for this? Well, that's what the third question was for, the sort of attribution. And so what we found was the main reason was cough syrup, actually. So essentially, a couple people said, specifically regarding cherries, that they just don't like the taste of cherries, and that was the only reason that they thought they were the most dog shit. But like 60% or so of the people thought that the reason that they considered cherries the most dog shit was because they had had gross cherry-flavored cough syrup when they were a kid, or recently. And so when they ate cherries, they sort of associated it with this gross cough syrup flavor, and so they didn't like it. And there were some other people that put down other stuff that wasn't really important. Now, people might be wondering, what's the deal with this gross cherry cough syrup? Where does it come from? Well, the story really begins with a brilliant young food scientist, up-and-coming guy named Lucifer Not a Good Guy, who was doing his PhD dissertation back in the early 1900s. This goes way back, and he just loved the taste of great foods. He loved eating great tasting foods, and he loved doing science stuff. He was a really brilliant guy, great with science stuff and doing science, and he just loved doing science stuff to make food taste good, because that's really what food science is about, right? And he just loved doing that. He was doing that all day. He was doing his PhD in food science. It was just called food science at the time. And one day, very unfortunate day, he was just walking down the street. He was on the sidewalk. He was eating a banana, as you do. And then he stepped on a banana peel from a completely different banana that just happened to be there. And he slipped and fell. And when he fell, what happened was he was holding his arm in such a way that when he landed on the pavement, the banana went straight directly into his right ear. And then comically popped out of his other ear on the other side of his head, completely intact. However, as the banana went through his head, although the banana remained intact, his brain did not. And so he suffered severe and irreparable damage, both to the part of his brain that makes you taste good stuff, and also the part of his brain that gives people human empathy. That classic part. Everybody knows what I'm talking about with the human empathy part of the brain. And so, the next day, what he did is he returned to his food science lab, and he tried to start doing some food science stuff, doing science stuff to make food taste good, as you do. And what he realized was that he couldn't taste good food. He couldn't tell that food tasted good or not. And he was getting really frustrated because he was like, how can I do food science if I can't tell if food tastes good or if it tastes bad? This is incredibly frustrating. And then, he was sort of getting into a fit, getting frustrated, and he was watching one of his colleagues nearby who had done sort of a bit of a failed experiment. He'd made some kind of chemical and was taste testing it with some food, and he was like, ooh, oh, gross, ooh, that's just too sour and bitter, that doesn't taste good, that tastes really bad, actually. And Lucifer, in response to this, he actually started laughing. He just started cackling to himself, like, That didn't taste good at all. That tasted bad, huh? That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny that you just ate some gross, nasty tasting stuff. I find that pretty funny, actually. Um, and that was the sort of eureka moment for him. Now that he couldn't taste food that was good anymore, and he thought it was really funny because the part of his brain that gives you human empathy was gone and broken now. Um, he thought it was really funny when people tasted bad food. What he realized was that he could do, just like food science, he could do science stuff on food, but instead of doing it to make the food taste good, he would actually do it to make the food taste bad. And, that's what he did. He did all kinds of crazy science stuff for years in his lab. He made all kinds of different chemicals and foods that tasted really bad. And not only this, but he indoctrinated a generation of food scientists for years to come, and founded the sort of subfield within food science of evil food science, which does science stuff to make food taste bad. And so now there are all kinds of colleges with departments or sub-departments within food science for specifically for evil food science, where all the students and professors are making the food taste bad. It's really have a corrosive effect on society. And so, just to give further example on Dr. Not a Good Guy's influence, the kind of things these evil food scientists do. They have sort of various demonic rituals and practices. They use lasers. They use sort of demotivational posters to make sure they're always in a bad mood. And they just use all kinds of gross, really nasty stuff to make food taste as bad as possible. And then either in the early days with Dr. Not a Good Guy's work, basically he would make food that tastes bad, and he would sort of try to sneak it to people without them noticing, and then he would laugh whenever they ate it, because he thought it was funny when they were eating gross stuff. But there was a big sort of breakthrough with one of Dr. Not a Good Guy's most sort of promising, really prodigal students, and this was a young, bright student by the name of Eamon Mephisto. And so, one day in the lab, Eamon was, messing around, doing all kinds of different science stuff, and he discovered this chemical called codeine sulfate. And he tried tasting it, and he noticed that it just tasted really bad. It was just super gross. It was like, oh man, this is awesome. I can't wait to give this to all kinds of people. And so, he would go out and he'd be sneaking around, and, he'd go to a restaurant and somebody'd be eating a sandwich and they'd look away and he'd pour a little codeine sulfate on the sandwich, and, they'd take a bite and he'd laugh at them. He would go out and there'd be a little kid eating some ice cream, and he would walk up to him and be like, "What's that behind you?" And then he would put some codeine sulfate on the ice cream, and he would laugh. But one day, there was a very large man that was very sick. He was out at a fancy Italian restaurant, and he was eating a big bowl of ravioli. And he was like, "Oh, I'm so sick, I have to use the bathroom." And while he was in the bathroom, Eamon went up and he snuck some of this, some of the classic codeine sulfate into this bowl of ravioli. And the big man came back, and he was very sick and he was coughing the whole time. And he ate this ravioli because he was just so hungry. He was like, "Oh, something's wrong with this ravioli. It's just so gross, but it's so hungry. I'm so hungry. I just have to eat the whole thing." Um, and Eamon was snickering to himself. He thought this was really funny, but then he had a realization when the fat guy said, "I don't know what it was. It may have been something in that ravioli, but my cough is just gone. I don't know what happened, but it's nice. At least there's that. Even though the ravioli tasted really, really bad, at least my cough is gone." And so that was a real eureka moment for Eamon, because that discovery led him to basically make all kinds of gross foods and then disguise them as medicinal substances, so that he could market them and have people pay for them and eat gross stuff intentionally. And so that's really where, codeine sulfate, you may know, is an ingredient within cherry cough syrup. And so this is really sort of how cherry cough syrup came to be. And This is a really important issue for me because I am one of many victims of this sort of evil food science ideology and its effect on society. When I was a little kid, I always loved going outside at recess, going out on the playground, and just running around and putting my hands all up in the dirt and rubbing it on my face and licking various things on the playground and running up to other kids and breathing in their faces. And I'd just be getting sick all the time. And just about every day I would come home and I would just be coughing my lungs up. And I would get home and I'd be coughing and coughing. I'd be trying to hide it so my mom wouldn't notice, but she'd always be able to tell. She'd always be able to tell that I'm just coughing a fit. And she'd be like, all right, buddy, all right, Sean, you know what we got to do. You know what you got to do. You got to have your cough medicine. You got to have this gross, disgusting cherry cough syrup. And I'd be like, "No, mom, please. It's so gross. It's so gross. I don't want to." But what she'd always say. She'd always say, "Son, if you're coughing, you just got to suck it down. You gotta suck down that cough syrup." And she would hand me this full bottle, a full gallon bottle of cherry cough syrup. And I'd be like, "Mom, can't I just have a spoonful? Most kids, they just have a spoonful. I don't need to suck the whole thing down." And she'd just say, "Sean, you gotta suck it down. It's the only way." And so I would every single time, just about every day. I'd come home, I'd be coughing, and I'd have to suck down an entire gallon of cherry cough syrup. And, ever since then, though I haven't had cherry cough syrup in a long time, um, I'm still cursed by its effects. And, anytime I try to eat something that's cherry flavored, I just find it extremely gross and I just can't eat it. Now, with that part of the story wrapped up, I'll begin our discussion into the sort of beverage of interest mentioned at the beginning of this talk by discussing Gatorade. So we had another survey that was conducted this was back in November of 2017 with about 1,000 subjects or so. And basically, we had a bunch of different Gatorade flavors, and they're sort of the most like common ones. And all we did was we asked the subjects, about these Gatorade flavors. Like, do you think these flavors have like broad appeal? And so this will become relevant in a second. But basically, what we found is that most people think that lemon, lime, orange, the various sort of pretty common Gatorade flavors, they generally have pretty broad appeal. Right? People like lemon, lime. People like orange. All that stuff. There's one exception here, which is the Fierce Grape Gatorade, and there's sort of a note that grape is yet another flavor that has sort of had the same problem as cherry, though I don't think it's not quite as common in gross medicine. And Fierce Grape is also a purple flavor of Gatorade, so most people, when they see purple Gatorade, they'll be able to identify that it's grape, and so they'll successfully be able to avoid it most of the time. If there's someone that was cursed by EFS and can't stand the taste of grape. So Gatorade, most flavors generally pretty broad appeal. Now, something interesting about Gatorades, and we've got some images here to sort of demonstrate the different varieties, is that there are a number of different kinds of blue Gatorades. Now, these different blue flavors have very, pretty generic names, Glacier Freeze, Arctic Blitz, Cool Blue, all sort of wintry blue kind of vibes. And, another thing we asked our survey subjects about these kinds of Gatorades was like, what would you describe the taste of this Gatorade as? And so most of the responses were like very vague. A lot of subjects weren't actually able to place like any particular flavor. They pretty much said, it's just kind of fruity for most of them. But, the most common responses were here. So, with Glacier Freeze, there's some kind of citrusy, maybe strawberry kind of thing. With Arctic Blitz, it's like vaguely melony, but it's hard to tell. The most sort of sort of describable or defined one was Cool Blue, because not everybody, most people were able to recognize when drinking the Cool Blue, like, oh, this is that classic. This is just the classic blue raspberry kind of deal. You know what I'm talking about. We all know the classic blue raspberry flavor. And but what's notable about this, and this is sort of building on the fact that these Gatorade flavors are generally have broad appeal, is that people don't really care that much if they get one of these blue Gatorades versus the other sort of two blue Gatorades in this in this category, right? Because they're all generally not very offensive. Generally fairly broad appeal fruit flavors that people like. You can recall that strawberry and melon were both fruits in the sort of top category from our earlier survey. Now, an important thing to note about Gatorade is that it's consumed when people are, exercising or working out, and a lot of time this is in competitions like races and bit long bike rides and things. And so often, there will be volunteers helping out, handing people Gatorades, or participants will be giving each other bottles of Gatorade or cups of Gatorade, and so they won't be able to see the label, right, to identify what flavor of Gatorade it is. But people may still want to be able to discern what kind of flavor of the Gatorade that they're getting, right? So we asked the subjects, if you're in this kind of situation that I just described, what method would you use to discern the flavor of the Gatorade? As you can see, the vast majority of subjects said that they would just look at the Gatorade and identify what color it is. There are a couple exceptions. Some people just don't even care. They just suck it down. They just drink the Gatorade. A couple of people said they do a sniff test, and then there was a small minority that said they actually do go to the trouble of asking what flavor of Gatorade is. But these guys are weirdos. The general trend among the sort of population in our survey was that you just look at the color and you can identify what flavor it is based on that. Now, notably, this isn't necessarily true of blue Gatorades, but with the sort of three previously mentioned flavors of blue Gatorade, it seems that people don't generally care that much because they have broad appeal as fruit flavors, and yeah, so people don't have strong opinions on whether they get Cool Blue or say Glacier Freeze. Now, this leads me into my story, which gets into the beverage that this talk is really all about. So, several years ago, I was participating in a long bike ride with my family out in Wisconsin. And I had just finished a long ride. It had been about 40 miles. I was very tired. I was very exhausted and thirsty. I just wanted to drink something, ideally some tasty Gatorade. And somebody luckily handed me a bottle, and that bottle just contained a blue liquid. And I quite reasonably assumed, and correctly, that it was a blue variety of Gatorade. And so I was like, "Oh, thank you. Oh, I love blue Gatorade. I love Gatorade. I can't wait to drink this Gatorade." And I just grabbed the bottle, and I just tip it right up, and I start sucking it down. I start sucking down the blue Gatorade because I'm just so thirsty and exhausted. But as soon as it fills my mouth, as soon as it touches my tongue, I just instantly revulse and throw my head back, because what do I taste? That's right, cherry. Despite being a blue Gatorade, I taste the flavor of cherry. And immediately I throw my head way back, and all the Gatorade that's in my mouth, I just spit directly up into the air. This massive spit take, basically like a giant sort of this fountain of blue liquid shooting just straight up directly out of my mouth with such vigor and such force, going so high up into the air that if you were Ice Mario from Super Mario Galaxy, you could probably jump and stand on top of it. That's just how powerful this fountain of Gatorade was. Notably, this is a power up that was absent from Super Mario Galaxy 2. Interestingly enough, but that's a bit of a diversion. Now. This was, an incredibly traumatizing and frustrating experience for me to have, my trust in blue Gatorade broken by this cherry flavor. And I've tried talking about this issue with other people, and sometimes I get rebuttals or questions, and a lot of people will say, well, this is just like blue raspberry. Blue raspberry is a thing. Why can't blue cherry be a thing? Now, this is I think this is completely disanalogous. These two cases have nothing to do with each other. And to explain this, I'm going to discuss the origins of blue raspberry. So long ago, back in the the mid 1800s or so, a group of very intelligent and conniving little otters decided to start their own ice pop company that they called Otter Pops. And so they made various different fruit flavored ice pops, and they sold them to kids, and kids would buy them and eat them up. And notably, they had a bunch of different red colored flavors. They had a strawberry, they had a melon, and they had a raspberry. Um, and something that, well, there are various theories around this. Some people will say that the otters were intentionally covering it up. But the facts of the case are that it was revealed by the FDA in the mid 1900s that the red dye chemical used in the raspberry flavor of Otter Pops was, in fact, carcinogenic and tended to give people brain tumors and damage their brain, and tended to actually do a lot of damage to the classic part of the brain that gives you human empathy. And so it was, really dangerous to society because it was, turning kids into evil people and potential evil food scientists. So really, really scary stuff. And so the FDA really cracked down on the otters for this. They said, we love you guys. You're really cute, conniving and wisecracking, funny otters, but you can't sell this stuff to kids. So they're like, all right, we'll stop. We'll stop putting the carcinogenic red dye in our raspberry Otter Pops. But the thing is, the kids love the raspberry Otter Pops, so they were like, well, we can't just stop selling these. So what they realized was they had this light blue food coloring sitting around, and they were like, well, shoot, why don't we just combine this with the raspberry and sell that, and we'll call it blue raspberry. We're not selling anything else that's blue. Nobody likes blueberry. And so that's what they did, and that's where blue raspberry comes from. Now, if we compare that to, the situation with Gatorades, right? As pointed out, Gatorade already has 3 different varieties of blue Gatorade. So, they don't have, like, a dearth of blue varieties of Gatorade. They didn't need to make a new one. The only red kinds they have are like Fruit Punch and some weird like red berry thing. And I think there's like a strawberry something, strawberry banana or something, but that's like pink, so that doesn't really count. So they could easily make like a dark red Gatorade that's cherry flavored. But they just decided to make a blue cherry Gatorade because they're cretins, I guess. I don't know. So yeah, this is I think these two narratives are completely disanalogous. It's nothing like blue raspberry. Now, not everyone has experience with gross cherry cough syrup or gross grape cough syrup or other fruit flavors being spoiled by gross different medicines. But a lot of people have experience with Pepto-Bismol. And in fact, cherry was not the first sort of victim of EFS in the sort of fruit world. It was actually another fruit called tea berry. Not many people know about, but there are still some places where they make tea berry candies and ice creams and things that they used to be much more popular. But basically, some evil food scientists were did their classic thing, making foods and things people eat taste bad. They came up with this gross sort of chalky paste Pepto-Bismol stuff, and they were like, well, what if we just put tea berries in it, and then everybody's going to hate the taste of tea berries because they're just going to associate with this gross paste that people put to, like, relieve their stomach problems or whatever. And that's what they did. And so now, anybody who's had Pepto-Bismol a couple times, you eat some kind of tea berry ice cream or candies, and what you taste is basically like a bit of sweetness and just like the taste of Pepto-Bismol, and it's like, this is gross. So I think most people can relate to that experience, even if they haven't had even if they haven't tried to have tea berry flavored stuff. Now, let's just engage in a hypothetical for a second. You've been on a long run with some of your friends, you've been having a great time, but you're really tired, you're really sweaty and exhausted, and you're thirsty, and you just want some Gatorade. And somebody hands you a bottle, an unlabeled bottle, but it's got a sort of greenish, yellowish kind of liquid in it. And you see it, and it's like, yes, here's that classic lemon lime Gatorade. I can't wait to drink some of this Gatorade. I just love that classic sour and sweet lemon lime Gatorade. It's so good, and you just tip it up and you start sucking it down, right? But then the moment that this Gatorade touches your tongue, you don't taste that classic sour, that classic sweet. What you taste is like some kind of watery Pepto Bismol flavor that's kind of sweet. And you, I mean, you just did a state of shock. You're like, what is this? This isn't lemon lime Gatorade. This is disgusting. And you ask them, what is this? What is this nonsense? And your friends are like, oh, this is a new kind of Gatorade. It's tea berry Gatorade. And you're just appalled. It's just horrendous. It's awful. And you'd probably be pretty upset and mad about this experience just because of how much, because they have broad appeal. You probably like lemon lime Gatorade, and you almost certainly don't like tea berry Gatorade. And if this happened to you, you'd probably be pretty mad. You might want to do something like this, or really, you might want to do something like this. You just might be really frustrated by this experience, I think. So hopefully engaging in this hypothetical really, helps people understand the plight of, cherry non-enjoyers and the victims of evil food science with regards to this blue cherry Gatorade beverage here. And, you know, um, I think that helps. I hope that helps people appreciate that kind of experience is what I have to deal with every day. That someone happens to offer me a blue Gatorade and doesn't specify what flavor it is. Now, hopefully, you can empathize with my experience and the real problem that is blue cherry Gatorade, and so you might want to, contribute to the cause of trying to get rid of this blue cherry Gatorade from society. Well, luckily, associated with this presentation, I've created a change.org petition online that's linked with this video, and you can go online, you can sign it. The title is Abolish Blue Cherry Gatorade, and you can get your voice heard to let the producers of Gatorade know that you want Blue Cherry Gatorade to be abolished. And if we get enough signatures, then I believe that we can make this change and make the world a better place. Now, no research can be done without, no good research anyway, can be done without, copious amounts of funding. And, there was a lot of research that went into this presentation. And so before I close things out, I would like to thank the various sponsors of the work that went into this project. So, this really began as a grassroots movement with the support of the United Workers of the Michigan 8 Ball. So, these guys and girls and all sorts, they have a long history of intersectional organizing at bars and at casinos and all kinds of different businesses and establishments that happen to have 8 ball pool tables in them. And so they have a long history of defending the freedoms and rights of minorities like Michiganders that don't actually like cherries. So these guys were super helpful, as well as some seed funding from my friend Mohammed bin Salman on getting this project sort of started and off the ground. And the ongoing funding for most of the research and surveys that have taken place come from the Coca-Cola Company, as well as the Jeffrey Epstein Family Foundation. So shout out to them. And I'd like to thank you, the audience, for attending this presentation, and I hope you support our cause.